Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today we're going to be choking down a cold handful of garbage fries with HBO Max's new series Velma on this random act of opinion coming up right now. Let me tell you something, opinion nerds. The value you get from exploiting an IP is all about what you Scooby-Dooby-Doo with it. I recently shared some thoughts about the Addams Family adaptation Wednesday over at Netflix, where I pondered the value exchange between an IP and any adaptation of it, especially one that looks to upend or subvert certain elements of it or uses it as a springboard to create something more or less new. Obviously, the IP brings a value to the new work in the form of its familiarity, its legacy, its access to its fan base. But to make the exchange even, the new work has to contribute something back to the IP, something additive that increases the overall value. To do less is to simply exploit the IP and the goodwill it has with its audience. For instance, the show Riverdale, an adaptation of the classic Archie comics, exploited the IP to bring a curious audience to an otherwise aimless and pointless teen drama without creating anything that could be filtered back into the IP to increase its artistic or cultural value. In the case of Wednesday, while I felt that the show had a certain entertainment value on its own, because it seemed to be pieced together from other better ideas and didn't seem interested in the Addams Family IP outside of its most superficial aspects, it didn't really give any value back to the IP outside of possibly exposing it to a new generation. With the new HBO Max series Velma, adapted from the much-loved Scooby-Doo franchise, not only do I think it's a crass exploitation of the IP that returns nothing of value to it, I don't think it's a very good show on its own, but I can't seem to decide whether I think that's on purpose or not. Velma explores a very different version of the Scooby-Doo universe and how the Gang of Mystery Incorporated came together to form the deductive, monster-stomping squad we know them to be. Only this version of the gang has to deal with a mountain of personal and personality issues while attempting to solve a series of gruesome deaths in their high school, all while Velma battles a crippling guilt over her mother's disappearance that physically incapacitates her when she even thinks about solving a mystery. The show stars Mindy Kaling, Glenn Howerton, Sam Richardson, and Constance Wu. The show has only 2 episodes in the bag, but I'm going to avoid spoilers as best I can. IMDb lists the series as being developed by writer Charlie Grandy, who's written for The Office and Saturday Night Live. But much of the credit for the show's tone and direction seems to be given to executive producer and star Mindy Kaling, after whom the title character is modeled, though she has no writing credits on the show at this point and is one of several executive producers. Given her position out in front of the show, it's difficult not to see why she would get the brunt of both the praise and the criticism for the program. I know absolutely nothing about Kaling as a performer, but since she's had multiple writing credits, which include creating or co-creating shows like the TV adaptation of 4 Weddings and a Funeral and the series The Sex Life of College Girls, also for HBO Max, it isn't too much of a stretch to see her exerting a certain level of influence on the show, even if she isn't credited for it. It's probably even fair to say that had it not been for Kaling's involvement, the show might not exist at all, at least not in the form it currently does. And if you've seen the show's first 2 episodes, your mileage is going to vary on how you feel about that fact. Scooby-Doo and the Kids of Mystery Incorporated have been a near constant staple of children's animation since the Mystery Machine first rumbled across screens in 1969. But even with the live-action films that took some serious liberties with the material, there's never been an adaptation that's come close to Kaling and Company's approach. The character of Velma has long existed on a strange crossroad of average girl relatability and weirdly hot nerd girl fantasy. Compared to the slender red-headed Daphne, the deceptively curvy Velma, I mean, really, it's just a baggy sweater. Well, she's always seemed like the kind of girl you could either be or be with, both ideas that have contributed to the desire to push the normally non-sexual children's show character into the role of sapphic heartthrob. While challenges to so-called conventional beauty standards have made it less fashionable to appear to want to emulate the model-esque Daphne, a changing cultural outlook on white men making square-jaw hunk and assumed leader of the group Fred problematic by proxy, and the fact that perpetual munchie machine Shaggy has only ever been important for his relationship to the titular Scoob-Doo, Velma has been maneuvered into a prime position seemingly as the nexus of all things Doo related. She seems to have become the one character the franchise can't do without, and that, at this point, also seems to include the character the whole thing is fucking named after. With that being the case, it shouldn't be surprising that Kaling would look to craft Velma, both the show as a whole and the character in specific, around herself. Of course, the number one question is whether or not making this version of Velma a self-insert brings any unique value to the show's nature as an adaptation, especially since Kaling's expensive private schooling in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and graduation from Dartmouth College makes her life experience much more akin to how people imagine Fred or Daphne's upbringing than Velma's, thus making the self-insert appear superficially self-deprecating. Beyond that, one wonders what kind of statement Kaling and her creative partners are trying to use the show to make, because they're very clearly attempting to say something about something. On the one hand, race-swapping 3 of the 4 characters, Daphne, Velma, and Shaggy, are changed from being nondescript white to being nondescript Asian, non-specific Indian, and possibly mixed African American, respectively, while leaving the blonde-haired Fred White as a subject of mockery and disdain towards his display of privilege would seem to send some kind of assumed woke leftist message. On the other hand, the show's exaggerated depiction of Crystal Cove's high school and its overt mocking of teen drama tropes in its very first episode point more towards the show being a satire of post-2000s teen dramas than any kind of woke message delivery system. As an adaptation, Velma doesn't look to make any kind of statement about or exploration of the material it's adapted from, as much as it seems interested in blowing a hole right through the middle of its tame reputation with an intentionally provocative approach. With the removal of Scooby as a character combined with the overall tone of the show's humor, it seems WB wants to both play with the recognizability of the Doo franchise while defensively keeping as much distance from it as they can so as not to confuse the new show with any of its other more kid-friendly incarnations. The Velma series gives its ever-deductive title character a tragic backstory that turns solving mysteries into a self-imposed torture, makes perpetually implied to be a stoner Norval, there is no Shaggy, into a vehement stare-into-the-camera anti-drug poster boy, makes popular rich girl Daphne into a drug-dealing poser with a mysterious past, and continues the trend of turning Fred into a useless himbo while playing into the long fantasized but always unsupported Velma lesbian fantasy angle. With its crass sense of humor and skating of the sexual edge, the show is intended for mature audiences, or at least audiences older than the teenage characters on the show itself. It reads less like a show satirizing teen mystery dramas for that genre's audience, and more like a show mocking teen mystery dramas for the amusement of adults while using the Scooby-Doo IP as a gimmick to gain their interest. In my opinion, this makes the use of the IP exploitative rather than explorative, while their particular approach to satire and treatment of the characters makes the whole thing seem mean-spirited. All of this exists under the notion that Velma is a comedy series, and the most important question should be, is the show funny? And honestly, I can't say that I think it is. I can say I found it occasionally amusing, but overall its lowbrow obviousness just doesn't do anything for me. Now, I'm a sucker for knowing how things end, so I'll be tempted to watch the show all the way through just to get the answers and see how it all resolves. That being said, I'd be just as satisfied reading the Wikipedia plot synopsis, probably more so. And this isn't because I have some deeply held attachment to the Scooby-Doo series. I watched it as a kid, I saw at least the first live-action film at some point, and I've kept up with what's being done with the property out of pop culture curiosity. But I don't really care about it any more than I do any other thing about people and places doing things of which none exist. I'm not someone who doesn't understand that comedy comes from exaggeration, and the contrast between humor and sincerity in a story is what forms the engaging dynamics of shows like this. I'm not a moron. What I don't like is shows whose humor seems to be based on making every character ridiculous and awful so it can spend the majority of its time cracking jokes about how ridiculous and awful all the characters are, especially when that awfulness is so often associated with some kind of trauma or abuse response. There are just some things I don't find all that funny. Like the Harley Quinn show running on the same service, the only audience I can imagine for Velma is one that finds the whole Scooby-Doo thing amusing, but overall thinks it's rather stupid, and that seems to include the people working on the show. There's taking good-natured shots at a thing you like, And then there's bending it over a table and laughing at it while it cries. There's also a difference between holding a stifling sense of reverence for a thing such that you're incapable of doing anything creative with it, and putting on display the fact that you have no reverence for it in any respect at all. No matter what she says, there's simply no way that Kaling is going to beat the allegations that this is just a vanity project, allowing her to virtually cosplay as the character she believes she most relates to, while hiding behind a veil of pseudo self-deprecation, especially as Velma is easily the smartest and most capable character on the show. The use of the Scooby-Doo IP is irrelevant to the material beyond the possible meta-joke of it being, like Riverdale, a raunchy and irreverent mature adaptation of what's seen as a classically wholesome kids series, and that only has value if it's something you care about, which I fucking don't. But maybe that's a reflection of our relationship with the Scooby-Doo franchise right now. Maybe after almost 60 years, the idea of a group of teenagers and their talking dogs solving mysteries and debunking the supernatural in eccentric locations is just too much for even children to invest any amount of sincere value in. In 2019, we saw the premiere of Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, a more classic Scooby show that ran for 2 seasons on the Boomerang Network and whose Hook was the special guest star of the week, many of them like Penn and Teller or Jim Gaffigan being people for whom children would probably be unfamiliar. 2020 saw the release of the theatrical Scoob, a CGI animated film firmly updating Mystery Incorporated to a more contemporary aesthetic. This had been approached more recently with the animated Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated series in 2010, a show that was much loved by a certain older audience but didn't rejuvenate the Scooby franchise as had been hoped. Ironically, Mystery Incorporated successfully took the franchise more in the teen drama direction that the Velma series satirizes. It would appear the relationship between Scooby-Doo and the audience is at a sort of impasse, with its recognizable style being so easy to parody that a more sincere approach becomes difficult for launching a full-scale franchise comeback, and any attempt to make it more contemporary risks alienating those who feel it's perpetually locked in the 70s aesthetic as part of its charm. At a time when the idea of performative representation in media, the kind Velma may actually be both exploiting and mocking, is almost a requirement for getting a project going, where does that leave a show about 4 white kids traveling the country in a van whose only problem seems to be keeping their driver supply with fresh ascots? Working with a legacy IP is tricky business. You don't want to be too precious with the material, as that will make you fearful of doing anything new or interesting with it, but you don't want to push it so far you lose any connection to what made the thing what it is in the first place. And while you're using the IP for its notoriety and playing either on or with its existing audience, you hope that you can add something that will become part of the IP and provide value into the future. It's hard to imagine a show like Velma giving anything back to Scooby-Doo that it can use going forward, but I also doubt that anyone involved with the show much cares. And other than continuing to be in the Mindy Kaling business and continuing to try to drum up subscribers for their affiliated streaming service, it's doubtful that the custodians of the IP much care either, as long as they feel there is an appreciable amount of distance between the show and the IP proper, which does make one wonder why they went forward with it in the first place. Jinkies, gang. Maybe trying to understand the thinking behind that is the real mystery. This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.